Shutterstock Music.
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Saim Safdar, and you are listening to the CloudNative.fm podcast. In this show, we keep track of Cloud Native with Cloud Native experts all around the world. I'm excited and thrilled to host this show for you. This is episode number 16 of CloudNative.fm podcast. Today is May the 18th, 2021, and in this episode I am joined by Daniele Polencic, Co-Founder of LearnKX. Daniele is the author of Kubernetes book, author of weapons-grade Kubernetes training at LearnKX, author of Kubernetes Twitter threads, author of world-famous troubleshooting Kubernetes deployment article, tweet sender at LearnKX, always helping, caring, and always welcoming and great human being. And now Dan is here. Let's break Kubernetes cluster with confidence. Want to learn Kubernetes in Twitter? Follow Dan on Twitter at Daniele Polencic. And let's go ahead, say hi to legend Dan and cut it over to the interview.
Shutterstock Music. Shutterstock Music.
Thank you everyone for joining us today. This is episode number 16 of CloudNative.fm podcast. And today I'm really excited that I am joined by the LearnKX instructor. And I think most of the people, you know him very well, Dan Polencic. And he shared his journey with us, how he get introduced to the cloud native stuff. We're starting Cloud Native Journey of a Cloud Native Expert with my guest, Dan. How are you, Dan? And what are you doing these days?
I'm doing all right. Thank you very much for having me. Really appreciate it. I'm Dan. I'm one of the instructors at Learn Kubernetes, and I'm doing great.
So can you tell your audience a bit where you live right now and what part of the activities, because of the coronavirus, everybody got isolated in their home, kind of containerized themselves in their home. So what you are doing in this containerized environment?
So my containerized environment at the moment is Singapore. So before I was containerized, I used to be in London. So now I guess it's becoming more than a container. It's probably like a very rigid virtual machine here in Singapore as the lockdown is progressing further.
Yes, definitely. And thank you very much, Dan. You joined me. It's been a really tracking you to get you introduced to the Cloud Native podcast. And finally, after a long time, I'm finally going to be succeeded there. So tell us about yourself, how you get started with the Kubernetes, what your career's goals before the Kubernetes is not been there. So how you started your tech career, particularly in the Kubernetes landscape.
By chance. So I didn't look into Kubernetes. It just happened that at the time I was working for the UK government, they had a very large cluster. And not many people could use the cluster, so there were quite a few dozen teams, wanting to deploy applications, but didn't really understand how the technology worked at the time. So I used to be part of one of the central teams as a software developer architect, and I sort of saw the gap between the application developers and the platform. So I stepped in and I tried to understand what it was. Is there something that we can do to bridge the gap between developers and DevOps? So I started writing material with a few colleagues, and we organized a few workshops internally to the government. And then from there, a lot of people were quite interested So we expanded in brown bank sessions. We expanded into, Thursday clinic. You come in, we look at the cluster, we look at your application, we try to help you. And that's how it started. At the time, we still had pet sets, which I don't know how many people remember.
Yes, definitely. Actually, I think it's a quite interesting to know your story from the cloud native students, because they need to know how people get introduced to these kind of concepts. Because traditionally, speaking of this Kubernetes and cloud native stuff, it's look scary at really first, because there's so many things to learn. You start from containers, you end up learning Linux, then you end up learning a complex system in the whole IT right now, that is Kubernetes. So I think these are very complex things. So cloud native students need to learn, if they're listening to us, how did you learn these kind of stuff? What your journey of learning these technologies?
That's a good question. At the time, I remember I was using Docker quite a lot. I didn't understand, what was the reasoning behind it. I remember spending a lot of time containerizing everything in my laptop, and then running even the shell as a Docker container. When I started using Kubernetes, I didn't really know what I was doing. Minikube was really at the very beginning. So I just look at the documentation, look at the tutorials online, try to, put things together, and it was really overwhelming. I remember looking at the Ingress, sort of an Ingress controller YAML file for AWS, and was like, okay, I don't even know where to start. I don't even know what it means. What am I supposed to do now? But at the time, right, Kubernetes was not as developed as it is right now. So the documentation at the time was really lacking, whereas right now we've got quite a lot of, companies and individuals contributing to the documentation. So the onboarding right now is much, much better than what it was at the time. So I think if I had to do it again, I think it would be a little bit easier. I'm not saying it's easy, but it would be just a little bit better right now, just because of the amount of content that it is out there. I think the problem right now is the opposite. There's just too much content. So which content is good and which content is not? So I guess that's the challenge.
Yes, definitely. I think one of the interesting thing that we see that when the Kubernetes came up is being picked up very fastly by the whole community, and so many tools right now out there, and so many learning opportunities we have right now. So I think you started your career, you start learning Kubernetes, then I think right now you're doing a wonderful stuff of learning Linkage, blogs, posts, Twitter threads.
Thanks.
And books on Kubernetes and so many things. So now the next question came up, the natural question coming in the people mind: how Dan started this initiative of doing Kubernetes training in their platform called Learn Kubernetes?
So after we launched this training at the government, then everything was going quite well. We basically had like bookings for our internal workshops like a month in advance, and it was fully booked all the times. So when I left the government, I thought maybe someone else is interested in this technology. Maybe there is someone else who could learn from this. So what happened is I contacted a local training in London. And just put a website online to see if anyone else was interested in this technology. I didn't expect much, but I got a few clients, a few banks interested in doing some trainings, and that's basically when I realized that perhaps there was a little bit more than just sort of a side project. And then I'm an engineer. I like to build things, and I like to help people that are like me, like other engineers. So I didn't want to, build a training company. I wanted to, or doing marketing or anything like that. So I started, doing training, and then all the things I learned, I will basically find a way to share them. So that's how I started the Twitter account for Learn Kubernetes, and later on I started writing blog posts. For things that I was interested in, or things that I just learned, and I thought other people could be interested in reading too.
Definitely. And I think then one natural question came up the people mind because there is so many learning tools, so many opportunities to learn because the content available on the internet is kind of bloated for the people of mind. Which one is for me? Which one is not for me? What are the people I try to connect if I want to troubleshoot my Kubernetes cluster? So that's, I think, when everybody using Kubernetes and learning Kubernetes, these are the question came of the people mind, everybody minds. I think these are the natural questions when people start adopting and learning Kubernetes. So I think you started the Learn K8s, and the first thing when I see the first time, I see the Twitter handle of Learn K8s. They put on resources every 2 or 3 hours, and they are really effective and really nice articles. And these often looks very difficult to find over the internet, but with the Learn K8's Twitter handle, you can find it so easily. So what are the people behind these Twitter handles, the blog post on Learn K8s, and all these kind of crazy things that happening inside Learn K8s?
It's an interesting question. So the Learn Kubernetes Twitter account is basically, at the beginning was basically me going through all of the links I would find on the internet, just collecting them, and just at the end of the month I would basically just go through them one by one and then select the best ones. And I would just skim through or read the article and just write a small description. At the beginning when I started, it was like very few articles, like maybe 80 a month, 100 a month. And then people were quite interested about the articles because I try to select the best ones, the one I would read, or the one I would find interesting. And but what happened is between 2017 and now, so in 3-4 years time, is that the amount of content has gone up so much that what used to take me like 4 hours every week, or about 8 hours a month, depending on how much content were published during that month. It almost took like 40 hours a week, 40 hours a month. So like a full week, full time to just go through all the links, parse them, read them, and then just categorize them and then publish them. So it's just like a really long time. So what happened next is basically, I'm an engineer, so a few people helped me out, and we built like a small tool, which basically helps me out, just gather all the links. And I basically get an email every month, which I really hate. And this email contains all the links for the previous months. And then manually, I still go through them one by one and then select the best ones that I think people will find interesting. So I think it's still me. I think there is a lot of automation. I didn't have at the beginning because I didn't need it. But now I do need it because I pass anything between 12 and 600 links a month. That's, I believe, the same sort of amount of links, even more than even I think it's less than what Chris Short does for his own Twitter handle. So I think it's pretty normal, I would say, but yeah, it's still painful. But people enjoy, I guess.
Yes, definitely. The best thing that is people like to know that going to the Twitter handle, the one thing, and they'll see the new article, and currently in the production setup they have stuck in the issue, and then they grab the link from the Twitter handle, go to there. I think they feel really relaxed and praise about your effort as you to put on, because the things they need, somebody else has this opportunity to send it back. So I think that's really appreciated what you did. So I think the next question, I think people are listening to us, that's really important for them. If they are now the experts or kind of expert to Kubernetes and containers and container runtime is networking in containers, storage interfaces, all kind of things. So what do they do if they want to learn people Kubernetes and share their skills to the whole community? What should they do, kind of the stuff that you are putting on?
I think there are several projects that, so if you look at Kubernetes, right, I think we are at the very beginning, right? Then there are a lot of contributors, a lot of companies investing time and effort in making it better, but still, it's just the very beginning. We're getting to know how it works. We're adding features, we're building a community, we're building tooling, we're building documentation. So it is this ecosystem which is growing. But if you look at other ecosystem, like for example the Go community, or a really active community, I'm not sure it's a good example, but because I belong, I sort of usually make reference to it. If you look at the JavaScript community, right, they build several kind of things in the space of 20 years. And if you compare the JavaScript community and the Node and the Kubernetes community, for example, you can see how there are some gaps of what's needed, right? Of what the community has and the other does not. Like for example, the Twitter account, you might think the LearnKA's Twitter account is a new idea. It is not, right? If you look at the JavaScript community, they have plenty of those. It's just that there was no one doing the same thing in Kubernetes. And then there are several projects in the JavaScript community that are designed to advance people, right, and make them, and make the community overall better. And then if you look at the Kubernetes community, or just cloud native community, then some of these projects are actually missing. Now you might spot them as you go through. You might have, you might belong to other community. Maybe you are a Java expert, and you can see what's happening in the Java space. I tend to like JavaScript. That's why I look at things that way. But if you look at it, you might realize that in Java you might have certain Twitter handle or certain websites that you often visit, and then the same does not translate into cloud native. That's usually what I'm interested in, and I say, okay, this is something that people can find useful. Like for example, we've got plenty of comparisons between React, Vue, Svelte. But we don't have, comparison for ingress controllers, which is quite useful in Kubernetes, right? What kind of ingress controller should you use? Should you use Conk, Nginx? That's basically when I started to build, a comparison sheet for all the ingress controllers that we have in Kubernetes. So I think there are several opportunities. Now, those are generally very hard to spot. And, you need to really look for them. I think if you're an expert and want to help more people, I think, doing something even simpler, like just going into the Kubernetes user chat or just community, just helping out people. There are plenty of new people just getting started that they just need, I'm not saying you need to pay with them, but just need some sort of direction. I think this is probably where we are not doing particularly well. Not because we don't want to. It's just because we are at the beginning of the journey. So it's harder to onboard people into Kubernetes. So I think that would be like sort of an easy entry level. Then for some mid level, maybe contributing to open source projects, and then on top of that, there are also building tools and services that people will actually use for their day-to-day job.
Yes, definitely. I think the one thing that you raised very correctly, that because in the past when the Kubernetes came up, there is so fewer articles there online. But as of today, of 2021, I think more than 10,000, or we can't even estimate how much content is going to be published inside the Kubernetes community every month, every day, every week. So there is so much there. And if you put on some effort on doing things like the people already have done work on it, and then you share to the community, and the people knows that already these work has been done. But so you need to spot on what is the gap in the community, and then you go find out the solution for that. I think that is really important advice to them even. And I think the next question for the learners, I think this is a very common question that I from everyone. What are the pillars of learning in cloud native? Where do I start? We'll start from the Linux. We'll start with the Docker, start with the container. Now container is not just Docker, container D is coming up. And then we move to the Kubernetes. Then we need to know what the ingress part of it, because application are deployed as part of the ingress controller. Then we have networking. Then we have storage inside Kubernetes. So there is a, can you define the pillars or the steps? What are the 5 or 7 or 6, 8 steps that you need to follow in order to be successful in learning Kubernetes and cloud native?
Really, really hard. I think it's really hard because many people have got many different backgrounds. So you might approach Kubernetes as an application developer or a network engineer. And if you look at Kubernetes, from afar, right? You take a step back and you look at it. Actually, it's actually merging several sort of, roles or responsibilities together, right? Of course, to deploy a good application, you need to know, the application itself, but you also need to know Kubernetes, right? If you forget readiness and liveness probes, that's game over. If you're a network engineer, it's pretty much the same. You might be interested more in the cluster, but you can build the best cluster in the world. If the developer forgets readiness and liveness probes, it's game over. So I think you might want to learn Kubernetes, but I think you need to take into account where you're coming from and what's your strengths. Because if you start from what you know, it's a little bit easier for you to just translate your skills into something that can be used inside Kubernetes. So in that respect, if you're an application developer, of course you might be interested in just deploying things. If you're a network engineer, you might be interested in setting up your own cluster on bare metal and installing Metal LB, or any sort of this sort of technology. I think those are equally good, and I think that's basically the entry point. I think as you learn more, then you basically can cross over and maybe learn a little bit more on the other side as well. Sometimes it happens naturally. You don't understand why. You do a deployment and you see the application losing connections, and you might say, okay, what am I doing wrong? And start diving into the networking, start trying to understand how Kubernetes routes the traffic inside the cluster. Or you might do the opposite. You say, okay, the application developers need a little bit of help. I know that the networking has been built like this. Then I'm just going to try and understand what they are doing. So I think that's basically how I would approach it. At least that was my journey. I basically just do and try to understand how my skills map to what I know in Kubernetes, and then I expand from there. Because that's a little bit easier than learning everything at once. But once you probably want to know like some pillars of Kubernetes. Like I think in understanding how networking and endpoint propagation works inside a cluster basically solves like most of the issues I had, or just most of the issues that usually students face when they come to one of our courses.
Yes, definitely. And I think we just discussed what are the key prerequisites for learning the Kubernetes. And the next question, I think, if I am an engineer or project manager to my team, and if I want to hire the Kubernetes administrator, or I want to hire a Kubernetes application developer, what skills and what are the things I do interview him, or do I check for him if I want to hire for the team? Because I think that is really a misconception, because everybody thinks what to ask these people, because there is so many things. Like if we ask to test his knowledge, I think a whole month to interviewing these kind of what the Linux container and DevOps are. So what are the essential things the project manager or the hiring manager ask to the individual if you want to pick a best talent for their team?
I think the best way to go about this is actually not asking questions, but just propose some sort of, examples of things that you would use on a day-to-day basis, and ask the application developer, the DevOps, network engineers to solve it. I think that's actually, a real scenario. And, how you set up the test, I think, should be realistic on what they're supposed to do. an application developer, I would expect them to, package a container, deploy it, and use an ingress, for example. So probably those are the kind of areas that I would test the most. If you're a network engineer or DevOps, then I believe the most important things that you should know is, how is the traffic flowing inside the cluster, right? How are these, endpoint propagators? How do we use the services? Why? Because most of the issues that we see in Kubernetes are around misconceptions on how the traffic flows inside the cluster. So basically just, trying to set up either a test or trying to talk through this sort of stuff might actually, see if the candidate has got a good understanding on how this works. Of course, there are others that are Kubernetes. Kubernetes is not just networking or applications. We also have stateful applications, storage. We also have, several other projects. You might be interested in service meshes. But I believe, if you have a strong foundation, then you can build on top of that. So as long as you know the basics, you know the fundamentals, then you can easily pick up the rest. So for me, it would be like, okay, I test this, I test this candidate, I test this engineer on the basics. If I can solve that, then I'm pretty sure that I can build on top of that and learn other things which are more complicated than that.
And definitely. I think you've been the government sector been a while. I think is part of their journey in the cloud. I think then one question that people asking is for the government sector that they want to leverage the Kubernetes, and the startup, they want to leverage the Kubernetes for their next project. What are the things they need to know? What are the working plans for their companies to hire this individual? What are the working plans for the applications to build on top of that? For the startup, I think it's kind of everybody talking me to question that. We started our startup, we're part of the government sector, we want to leverage Kubernetes, but we don't know what are the steps and what are the things we need to cater for if we want to start our journey of building cloud native apps.
So that's kind of a common question. So building your own cluster, or just configuring your own cluster is something that you generally face at the very beginning of your journey. You don't know what you need, and you might need a list of things, but you don't know which one are the right ones. You don't also know what you need to do to get it up and running, which is also a kind of an issue. So I think generally there isn't like a straight answer. I think it depends on what you're doing. But at least from my perspective is, from someone who has been using Kubernetes for a while, is that I have, I started this list of best practices for Kubernetes, and that's basically something that I would basically start looking at when I want to build my own cluster. Have I done autoscaling? Yes. And is it good enough for what I'm trying to do? Yes. Move on. Have I done logging and monitoring? Yes. What kind of logging and monitoring? What kind of log aggregation service am I using, and why? And I move on to the list. So I think generally that's how I try to evaluate what I'm trying to build. That is going to give you basically an overview of what's missing, and the other things that is going to help you is to evaluate if maybe going with a managed with a service like OpenShift, for example, or Platform 9, or any or Rancher is actually a better option for you, because they can pre-package with some of the things that you will need to install yourself. When you start at the beginning of your journey with your own cluster, you might think, oh, okay, I just deploy the cluster, create the cluster in EKS. It's very quick, right? 5 minutes, done. Yeah, but what about authentication? What about storage? Right? What about scaling? What about metrics? What about logging? Right? You have all of these things that one on top of the other. They basically take time and need to be developed and rebuilt. Looking at something like that, and you compare, if you're a large organization or just a government organization, you might be, easier for you to actually engage with a provider such as VMware or Red Hat, and just bridge the gap for these kind of things. Or you might have a large team and say, actually, I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to learn as I go. The only issue is that you probably don't know how much time it's going to take to bridge that gap.
Yes, definitely. I think these are the very good tips that you talk about. And I think now switch things to the students. I think every students when I talk to the students of the university students and the college students, they're talking about that these are the stuff are not teach inside the universities and inside the colleges. So what do we do if we are part of the 6 semester students or just a year away from graduating from the university? So the content I or learn there is very difficult to the real world. So what they do if they want to kickstart their FYP and kickstart their semester journey in the cloud native, what are the tips you provide to them?
Or just build, just make anything. Just, yeah, I would suggest, there is no better way to learn something by breaking it and, building it. So that's also something that, it's also part of the courses that we do. There is a module in our courses that, this is my favorite by far. You basically build a cluster from scratch in 3 virtual machines, and then you break it, one node at a time, right? And it's really, fascinating to see people breaking the cluster and say, oh, but I was expecting Kubernetes to do this, but it doesn't work. Yeah, it does not work. It does not work the way you expect. So I think that's basically the experience, that it's kind of, of course, you can learn it on the job. You don't want to learn it in production. But this is the kind of, difference between, someone just learning because they're watching YouTube videos or just reading a book, and someone actually doing the work and trying things for themselves. So I think, at least that works for me. I usually try things and try to break them or build them, because that gives me some sort of real experience on how it works.
And what do you think, what is the motivation factor for learning new technology? How the motivation is important if you want to learn new things? What would it be what is the factor, how to rate the motivation, why it is important to learn any new technology, and you have to have some kind of motivation behind it?
I'm usually excited about some of it. I'm not excited about all technology. I'm excited on some of the technology, and I usually, look at it a few times before I actually dip into it and get started. So I don't know. I think for me it's just like, I don't know. I might be interested in trying new things or things that I've never done before, or some sort of edgy libraries or something. But at the same time, when Kubernetes came out, it was like, okay, this is not going to take over. This is just like something that is going to pass next year. And here we are, right? I think, the next 5 to 7 years to 10 years are probably going to be like all Kubernetes. And the next, technology will not appear anytime soon, I think. So I don't know. I would say I'm not a good example for this kind of question.
Yeah. And I think for the next few questions, what are the roadmap for the Learn K8s? What are the new courses, and what are the new skills what are the new courses and teachings is happening after the next, I think, 6 months remaining in the year of 2021, and how to find Dan as well on the internet, and if people get stuck to something, and if they want to learn Kubernetes and ask question, how to find Dan and Learn K8s and these kind of other peoples that you have in your team.
So the mission for Learn Kubernetes hasn't changed. So the plan is to help more people learn Kubernetes. I think there are some areas that are a little bit harder to understand than others. Like, for example, ingress controllers is fairly hard to understand. So how you route traffic inside the cluster. But there are also some areas which are very underserved. Like, for example, we're working right now on a way to model autoscaling in Kubernetes, right? So what kind of things you should do when you set up an autoscaler? Do you need an autoscaler with a pod autoscaler and a cluster autoscaler? How do you set them up so you can make sure that you have the base scaling for your cluster? How big is the node? What are the frequency that you need to check the metrics? Do you need to over provision? How do you do that? So all of these questions are quite hard at the moment. And so basically the plan is to help and answer answer those questions. So I think, again, it's always going back to, where people are struggling the most, how we can help, how we can bridge that gap. So that's basically where the content is going. So I think we're going to, the courses are going to stay. We're not going to change that. So we're still committed to help people learn Kubernetes, but we're just going to produce more content that, overall is going to be like just, helping anyone just get a better cluster overall. We want to raise the bar, not just for the people coming to the course, but just raising the bar overall. So that's that's the short answer. And then you can find me anywhere. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me on Slack. You can drop me an email. I usually, people ask me questions on LinkedIn all the times. I try my best to answer them. I get quite a few. But at the same time, all of these questions, all of the feedback that I get, I usually collect these, and then I don't throw it away. I just keep it there. So if I get the same questions a couple of times, then I know that people are struggling. So I might pair with someone else and write a blog post, or I might just we might take a note and build a small something that could help people on that direction. I think questions are good because if a lot of people asking the same questions, it means that there is a need for something to help these people overcome that problem.
Yes, definitely. I think asking question is where you learn most, by asking people.
Yeah,
that is really important. And I think before I let you go, I think we release a Kubernetes book, I guess, and on training this book as well. And I think on the topic of books and courses, I think Kubernetes releases now 4 times, and now they shrink to the 3 version a year. So how it's affect the Kubernetes author to update his book, update his content, because things are moving really faster. Some things are deprecated, something going down. So if somebody having the plan in 2021 or 2022 to write a book on Kubernetes, what advice do you give to them?
So I wrote a book, and I've got first experience of that. I think generally, depending on what you're trying to do, I think the core Kubernetes, primitives, the core Kubernetes features are not going to change very frequently. Yes, of course, sometimes we've got breaking changes, like, for example, all the imperative commands that we used to have changed. So we had to upgrade that. The ingress controller changing, that is going to be a major change. But these kind of changes, they happen rather infrequently. And then, of course, there are like a million changes, with very, very small features. So if you're targeting the core skills, then those aren't going away, or are just moving at a slower pace. And yes, if you're trying to keep up with the version number, I think, to be honest, 3 times a year is still very, very quick and a little bit too frequent. But I work most of my careers in large corporation, large organizations, so I can I relate to what used to be the environment, which is very slow pace, very slow.
Yes, I think hopefully we can see later down the road, Kubernetes came up this idea, might be 2 releases a year or 1 release a year, but I think 3 still is enough. But I think they heard about the community, 4 releases, it's so much enough, then 3 releases. Hopefully this gradually shrink to 2 or 1 in the coming year. But I think it's going to be a rapid pace and these kind. So before I let you go, the final question, what you did when you're not troubleshooting or deploying or managing Kubernetes cluster, what do you do in your free time?
What is free time?
if by chance, if you find a free time.
So if I don't have much free time. I like to spend time with my little one, if we've got the time, and if it can, when it comes back to technology, I usually try try new things. I think there is, an area, there is something moving in the CI/CD space, which is quite interesting. So people are starting to question, all of these pipelines that we've built, and are just sort of asking, is there a better way to do it? Is it Jenkins? Is it like a build tool like Bazel? I think that's an area that is quite interesting. I think it's the very beginning of something that will change. So I think that is something that interests me. And then, I think I cannot say no to programming. I still like to write code a lot. That's something that I miss when I write too much content.
And I think what are you, if I ask you the three technologies, which one you pick from, three ideas, or it's all that GitOps, DevOps, and serverless. What are part of which one you are eyes on, and which one you are looking for to learn more on this field?
Currently,
yes.
So I'm trying to learn, Bazel, this build tool from Google. I keep on a very close eye on TypeScript. I think that there is some interesting innovation in programming going on there. And then third one, I don't know, actually. I don't know. I think to be honest, maybe, I think those are the two ones that are mainly. I think Kubernetes wise, I think, there are way too many features. So I usually read the changelog when it comes out from Sysdig. So Sysdig usually produces like a blog post every time they release a new version. And I'm just like, okay, I can sort of understand one or two, but there are like more than 40 or 50 features, and it was just like I realized how little I know about Kubernetes.
Yes, definitely. Everybody asking the same question, because you learn so many new things. That you have so many things that you need to learn in moving forward as well. But I think it's a pleasure talking to you, Jan. It's been a kind of a dream for me to talk to you. You can do a tremendous amount of stuff on your side, on LearnGates and blog posts, Twitter threads, on LinkedIn. You help educate people on these new technologies, and you are keep busy all the time. And after connected with you, finally I got this opportunity to connect this, have a podcast with you. And hopefully I think everybody who's listening to your voice heard that Cloud Native is going to be stay here for a very long time. And if you get involved early, this gives you the opportunity to become a Cloud Native expert in moving forward. And I think you're going to adopt these things that Dan talk about today in this podcast. Learn new technologies, become expert on it, and then share these knowledge in the broader community. Ask and help people answer their question, help people answer these questions, and help them, the whole community, and understand what are the key gaps right now in the Kubernetes and Cloud Native, and build a tool or build some kind of article on these gaps and share them with the whole broader community. And if you are looking to learn new technology, new Cloud Native, and adopting Kubernetes, I think learngates.com is a place for you to go and check out the awesome resources that are available for you by the team of Dan. And thank you, Dan. Hopefully I try to
Thank you very much for having me.
Hopefully I try to connect with you again in future, but it's a pleasure talking to you.
Please do.
Bye everyone, and stay safe and stay healthy.
Bye.
Hey everybody, if you want to keep up what's going on in the Cloud Native ecosystem, we have a weekly podcast show on YouTube and SoundCloud by the name of Cloud Native Islamabad. You can listen for free every single week. We try to find cloud and Cloud Native experts, share updates on Cloud Native best practices, Cloud Native real-world use cases, Cloud Native deployment patterns, Cloud Native deployment strategies. Topics include AKS on Azure, EKS on AWS, GKE on GCP, cloud native architectures, cloud native application developments, container containerizing application, DevOps and automation, cloud native certification strategies, cloud native career tips, and more. So if that sounds awesome to you, head over to the SoundCloud and YouTube and subscribe to Cloud Native Islamabad.